Bill Gates says political polarization may bring it all to an end and could even lead to a civil war. Now, the headline is fascinating, but the quote is actually a bit more definitive than that. The quote is, political polarization may bring it all to an end. We're going to have a hung election and a civil war, he told Forbes recently. He didn't say maybe in that quote. He said we are going to have a hung election and a civil war. I don't disagree. Most of you know that I don't disagree. But it's fascinating because I'm called crazy years ago for saying basically this. And now Bill Gates, respected medical expertise, respected for his medical expertise, Bill Gates coming out and saying there's going to be a civil war. For those that don't know the context, I'll explain. And for those that do, please just bear with me for 10 seconds. Several years ago, about 4 years ago, an article was published where they interviewed several national security experts. This was either Atlantic or New York Mag or something. They said, based on their assessment of history in other countries, there was a 30% chance to a 90% chance of civil war happening in the United States. You take a look back at the election of Donald Trump, the street violence, the escalation of violence. And I've thought for some time now, like we really are walking into civil war territory. I've read up on the Civil War, and not all of it, but a decent amount. And I think we're knocking on the door, and I don't think the knock can be unknocked. The bell can't be unrung. There you go. That's how I say it. So I said this back in like 2018, but it wasn't me being like, I, Tim Pool, have seen things and think it's happening. It was more like, whoa, look at this article with respected professionals saying it might happen. That's crazy. I've seen some stuff that suggests that may be the case. And where have we gone since then? I mean, the Summer of Love, the 5/29 insurrection, they set fire to a guard post at the White House, and the president was forced in a bunker. 90 plus days of firebombing a federal facility. And you get January 6th. Yes, it was bad. I know not everybody on January 6th was smashing, through and trying to fight cops, but those people were there. Not like they were, they want to claim that there was like some planned insurrection. I kind of roll my eyes like, dude, these guys could have brought weapons they didn't bring. Anyway, here we are now with Bill Gates coming out and saying as such. And it's getting crazy. I want to reference a few things said by a few prominent individuals, notably Scott Adams and Bill Burr. I've commented on the Bill Burr thing several times already. Bill Burr says people aren't as divided as you think, just go outside. Laughably ignorant. And Scott Adams echoed something similar. Now, Scott, to his credit, has actually been right about a lot of things, so his take is interesting, but he still said something that I find to be incorrect. He said that there won't be a civil war because nobody wants to fight their neighbor. And then someone said, what's your source? And he said, walking outside. My first response before we read into Bill Gates' comments, and then we'll go through all these other quotes. I want to shout out to Scott. He's got another tweet where he said Republicans will be hunted. My question is, how do you reconcile Republicans will be hunted with there won't be a civil war? It's possible in that Republicans get hunted and then roll over and become hunted. That's it. I think Scott actually makes an interesting point. Bill is wrong when he says that people aren't as divided or hateful as you think. Scott's wrong. Scott's right in that, I don't think conservatives want to fight anybody. And it won't be a civil war in that context because, it'll be a revolution. The authoritarian left is increasingly gaining power, and they're using violence to do it. The right doesn't want to do that. And, to a certain degree, rightly so. We don't want civil war. We don't want violence. But we need law enforcement to hold the left accountable when they engage in it. But they've weaponized the DOJ against the right, against conservatives. I mean, we have a story right now that even, again, Scott Adams tweeted out, FBI agents lied to a judge to seize private property from a bank. I mean, it's absolutely insane, the story. Something like that. I think it was safety deposit boxes. So maybe it won't be a civil war. It'll be a revolution. But either way, I think there's something inherently wrong with both of these concepts. The idea that during the first Civil War, imagine someone in Atlanta. It's like 1861. And it's January 1861. And some guy walks out of his house in Atlanta and he goes, I hear him in the South, a slave-owning state, and I'm so angry I'm going to fight my neighbor. And then he knocks on his neighbor's door and says, ooh, we're going to fight. Is that what people think the Civil War was like? Dude, people in their own cities aren't fighting each other. That's not what happened. What happened is people from other states and people from these states were yelling and rabbling, and then soldiers came. Now, I'm not convinced that's going to happen. But what we've been seeing consistently so far is that people from one area go to another. So we'll get into all that stuff. But first, let me just read to you what Bill Gates is saying. Insider reports Bill Gates usually focuses on issues like poverty and infectious diseases through his charitable foundation. But another problem on his mind is the polarization in the U.S. Quote, I admit that political polarization may bring it all to an end. We are going to have a hung election and a civil war. Okay, he just literally said it. He said it's definitive, okay? I have no expertise in that. I'm not going to divert my money to that because I wouldn't know how to spend it. Bill. Let me help you out here. It's easy. You got a lot of money. All right, here's what you do. Find a corporate laundromat, a big one, all right? And then in the back under one of the machines, you've got to bring in some guys from Germany and then have them dig underneath. It's a tough process, and you're going to have to do it only in the dead of night. You're going to have to set up, how many of you have seen Better Call Saul? Okay, I watched Breaking Bad, now I'm watching that, so that's where my mind is. But anyway, my joke here is actually, build a bunker, or buy a bunker, or buy farm. Oh, wait a minute. Bill Gates is buying copious amounts of farmland. In fact, Bill Gates is the largest owner of farmland in the U.S. I wonder why that might be. Bill says, I have a lot of money and I don't know how to spend it. A civil war is coming. Also, I've bought more farmland than anyone else in the country. Yeah, I think Bill knows what's going on. And I think he's hedging his bets. Let me repeat that for you. Bill Gates is now coming out saying we are going to have a hung election. We are going to have a civil war. And then he says, I'm not going to, divert money in that direction. By the way, I bought a bunch of farmland. Makes you think, huh? Look, people who have the ability to build systems or generate revenue to such a degree, I have to say that I think their ability to predict things is better than others. That's basically how it works. Bill Gates says, if I do X, I will get Y. And he turns out to be correct more often than he's incorrect. So when Bill Gates comes out and says there's going to be a civil war, I go, okay. And then when you look back at all the farmland he bought, you go, okay, all right, I'm going to buy some farmland and try and figure out what that's all about. He says, the polarization and lack of trust is a problem. One of the best-selling books last year was a book by Robert Kennedy saying that I like to make money and kill millions of people with vaccines. It's wild. That sells well. I actually agree with Bill Gates. I'm not a big fan of the guy. I think he's kooky, but it is crazy when you have a book saying that Bill Gates is trying to kill a bunch of people. Now, here's the point. It doesn't matter if you like Bill Gates or don't like Bill Gates. The fact is, Robert Kennedy is going to write a book about Bill Gates in such a way. Bill's going to see that. You're going to have two factions. Technically, you have substantially more, but you have two opposing forces with disparate factions that all disagree with each other. That's what matters. You will say, you know what, Bill Gates, I don't like you. Someone may agree with Robert Kennedy, and that's what you get. You'll get polarization, fighting. Over the years, Gates and ex-wife Melinda French Gates have donated billions to vaccine research, development, blah, blah, blah. It's a conspiracy theory. People seek simple solutions, and the truth is kind of boring sometimes. Anybody who's got good innovations on reducing polarization, getting the truth to be as interesting as the crazy stuff, that would be well worth investing in. Bill. In 2015, the Hillary Clinton and the Democrats started this insane narrative about Donald Trump and Russia. And it persisted to 2016, 2017, 2018, and I think, into 2019 as well, right? It was fake. These people live in a crackpot diluted reality. So you want to come out and be like, these people believe crazy things about vaccines. Yeah, okay, dude. The other side thinks Donald Trump was secretly working for the Soviet Union. Let me spell that out for you. I'm not kidding. Jonathan Chait goes on MSNBC and says Trump may have been a Russian asset since the 80s. Yeah, that's the Soviet era, dude. Okay, he's just one guy, fine. But they genuinely were like, Vladimir Putin's controlling this country. That's insane. It's just such a wild, far-fetched theory. It's crazy. But you have your QAnon, you have your BlueAnon, and people are primed for insanity. Gates' summer reading list for this year, which he announced in June, includes Why We're Polarized by Ezra Klein. And Ezra Klein is also polarized, so spare me. I'm generally optimistic about the future, but one thing that dampens my outlook a bit is the increasing polarization in America, especially when it comes to politics. Gates wrote at the time in a blog post about his book picks. During the Forbes keynote conversation, Gates said that he and his ex-wife, Melinda, hope to keep their charitable foundation running 25 years more to focus on infectious diseases, blah, blah, blah. I don't care. Look, the point is, Bill Gates is just another person to come out, say there's going to be a civil war. But I'll put it this way. If you're on the left, the liberals, they're probably like, Bill Gates is right. Donald Trump supporters tried storming the Congress, the Capitol building, and shutting down the certification of the election. So they believe. If you're on the right, I know what most of you think about Bill Gates. Luke Rutkowski, We Are Change. We know exactly what you think about Bill Gates. And when he's saying this, what do you think his intentions are? Certainly not good ones. The Civil War was, I believe, the bloodiest battle in U.S. history. So I have to wonder about what their intentions may be. You know what? Outside of that, don't know, don't care. Let's take a step back from Bill Gates. Fine. He thinks there may be a civil war. Scott Adams disagrees. Scott Adams says there won't be a civil war in the United States, not even close. There is no appetite for it outside Twitter imagination. Well, okay. Why bring up Scott? Because of this tweet. Bob in SoCal tweets two things. One, Scott Adams says was prophetic. Two, the reply didn't age well. And he links to a tweet from Scott Adams on 7/1/2020 saying Republicans will be hunted. And this guy below him says officially jumps the shark. The reason why this tweet is important as a primer is that a man in North Dakota got in his car, chased down some kid who called his mom saying he was being followed by a guy, and the guy then rammed and killed him. The guy claims the kid was threatening him and trying to call his friends, and he was part of a Republican extremist group. Now, it may not be the reason why he did, that it was political, but that seems to be the narrative that's persistent, that this guy was drunk. He was drunk. He was paranoid and delusional and thought some 18-year-old kid was calling a gang of MAGA Republicans to come get him or something. And he said the kid was part of a Republican extremist group. There's no evidence of that, but he killed this kid. He killed the kid. You also have the story of Aaron Danielson, who was walking down the street in Portland when a guy with a big old Black Lives Matter tattoo put two in his chest, killing him. Those are a couple of stories. But we also have videos like Blair White put on a MAGA hat and walked around LA and got attacked. I bring this up first, and then I go to Scott Adams' tweet where he says there won't be a civil war in the United States. Not even close. There's no appetite for it outside of Twitter imagination. Let's read some responses, and then I'll address why I believe Scott is wrong on this point. Stephen Douglas says, there are also not two split militaries, each loyal to an opposing side. Let's correct the record on that one. The United States Civil War is unique in terms of global civil wars, historical civil wars. For instance, in Spain, it was pockets of nationalists and communists and nationalists. And it wasn't like all of a sudden the country fractured between two lines. They were pockets. Cities went one way, rural areas went another, and the people who knew how to fight took over. So it's not always that way. You can take a look at the fighting in the Bolshevik Revolution. Was some kind of civil war. But when one side is just horribly outmanned, it becomes a revolution. You can take a look at Weimar Germany. Two factions were fighting. Was it ultimately a civil war? Not really. But the communists lost. The Nazi party won and took over. How about this? Syria. The Syrian civil war was not the Assad regime versus the anti-Assad coalition. It was like 12 different factions, some of whom hated each other. In the early days, there were many secularist factions fighting against Assad. And then there was these Islamists, which ultimately become ISIS. This idea that a civil war requires two split militaries marching towards each other is absurd. But it is one element that could precipitate a civil war. One person responded, what evidence would you need to see to change your mind on this? Do you think it's possible if, what he says, do you think it's possible if principle due to the high propensity of the U.S. society, i.e. almost no incentive for people to engage in war? Scott says, we're too mixed by neighborhood, even household. It isn't possible in any scenario. Now, this is a very similar comment to what Bill Maher said a while ago. He said, there won't be a civil war in this country because the Mason-Dixon line would go through Nana's kitchen. Right. As if all civil wars always require a Mason-Dixon line. This is what people don't get. When you live in this world where your only understanding of history is American history, you are confused about what can and even has happened and what is normal. Normal civil wars around the world are not two opposing factions splitting and then clashing with each other on some Mason-Dixon line. Civil wars typically are disparate factions fighting and control of government falling, government losing confidence in its people. There's more, though. This person, Joshua, says, yep, just go to a Walmart or a Starbucks. Ain't nobody there fighting anyone for anything. Except for the last pack of donuts, says one guy. Here's one. Let's get this one. Major Kong says, your source, and Scott Adams says, walking outside. I love to read these because, when I started reading about civil war and seeing people say the U.S. is headed towards it, the first thing I did was I looked into civil war. I watched a few documentaries on the Spanish Civil War, and I went, wow, these are interesting points from national security experts. Then we get the Twitterati and conservative personalities as well as liberal personalities being like, it can never happen. Just walk outside. Which brings me back to the first point I made early on. I'd like you to imagine the good city of Atlanta in 1860. Let's just say, 1861 is when it all starts. Abraham Lincoln gets elected in 1860, and then he's inaugurated March of 1861. Before that, several states already secede from the Union upon knowing what, Abraham Lincoln's all about. Abraham Lincoln then declares secession to be illegal. And conflict emerges, the first battle, of course, being Fort Sumter. The South Carolina said, get out of our state. He said, not going to happen. And fighting breaks out. Several states then say, yo, what is going on? And they secede immediately. Some slave states actually join the Union. Yeah, that's one way things could happen. But I'd like you to imagine now in the good city of Atlanta, 1860, a guy, as I mentioned early on, walks out of his house and he's sitting there and he's going, oh, I'm just so angry at everybody. And then he sees a random lady walking down the street and he goes, I'm mad at you. And he runs up and he punches her in the face. Okay, it's an absurd scenario, right? All right, let's slow down. Let's make it a little bit more realistic. A guy in Atlanta walks outside and he goes, ooh, these dang Yankee Northerners. Oh, I'm so angry. I want to punch one in the face. And then his neighbor walks out and goes, ooh, I'm so angry too because I'm also a Southerner who's not a Yankee. Like, why would there be in southern cities a bunch of Yankees and what Northerners and Southerners? Why would they be mixed up in the city, going outside and just boxing each other in the street? If you're going to claim that civil war is predicated upon two armies marching towards each other and two split factions, what makes you think inside any of those factions they were mixed? I think it's just absolutely insane. So no, it's no wonder that a liberal New Yorker walks outside and surprise, surprise, there's no Trump supporters in sight. Now, it's possible. There were people in the South sympathetic to the North, people in the North sympathetic to the South. It's possible and nay, true that in cities like New York, you have conservatives and Trump supporters. Lo and behold, they don't go outside wearing MAGA hats or Trump shirts for the most part because they get attacked when they do. Which brings me to the main point. Scott, I think you've been right about a lot of things. On this point, I would say this. Walk outside with a MAGA hat on, waving a Trump flag in Portland, or I think you might be in Los Angeles. Walk around L.A. Blair White did it. Blair White got attacked, I think, several times. A guy was shot and killed in Portland, and even you yourself said Republicans will be hunted. But maybe there won't be a civil war, not because people aren't, going to fight, but because the right will do nothing. The summer of love, the insurrection at the White House, the weaponization of the DOJ. The left has been steamrolling and just doing whatever they wanted. What we need is a major midterm victory, and that's what they're scared of. Shout out to Bill Burr. We got a few more things to go through. Bill Burr shares blunt message about Americans being divided. He says they're not. On trigonometry, he just says America's not as divided as people on the internet think. Bill Burr, I implore you. You know what? You know what I did? I went to a small town, Front Royal, Virginia. Go there. Go to any small town. I go to a cafe, on the wall, Bible study, Bible verses. I went to a chicken restaurant. They give you little crosses on the tables. It's beautiful, delicious food. Yes, in these areas, it is the inverse. You go to a city, you see pride flags with the triangles in them, the updated one. You go to the country, you see crosses. These are disparate ideologies that cannot coexist. You go into cities, you will see as you slowly move out of the cities where these things start to coincide, where they start to clash. And what do you get? Chick-fil-A being protested. Not all the time, not always. There may not be a civil war, perhaps, but I don't see any reason why these ideologies are going to simmer down and come together. We asked, it was Nick Palmisano came on the show last Friday. And he said there wasn't going to be a civil war. It's just people on the internet talking about it. And I'm like, okay, have things escalated for the worse in the past 10 years? And he's like, well, yeah. Like, who could deny that? With the DOJ going after Trump and Bannon and arresting Trump supporters, 40 subpoenas, of course it's gotten worse. Has there been an escalation in violence? Well, yes, of course. Has there been a breakdown in the economy and in crime? Well, yeah, of course. Did the president himself go on TV and say half the country are extremists? Well, yeah. I mean, the president coming out and saying MAGA Republicans are an extreme threat to this country, but not the majority of Republicans, just the MAGA ones, which actually is the majority of the Republican Party. They're an extremist threat. Well, yeah, that happened. I mean, that's unprecedented. Okay. Did a guy get in a truck and run over a kid partly because the kid was a Republican extremist? Well, yeah, I mean, that happened. Did a guy in Provo, Utah run up to a random car and shoot him? Well, yeah, that happened. Did a guy in Portland get shot twice in the chest by a guy with a communist? Yeah, it all happened. And it keeps happening. Tell me one thing to signal that it is de-escalating. Just one thing. There isn't one. Because every step of the way, we keep hearing more. And we keep hearing people who don't know what's going on being like, nothing's going to happen. Nobody's fighting. That's Bill Burr. As I explained it, we hear in the news. We read the news all day, every day. We watch, we listen. So the metaphor is that we stand atop this great watchtower. And there are people all at the base of that tower. And there's forest and buildings and celebrations and beer and mead. And everybody's celebrating. Having a good old life and working and everything's great. But atop the tower off in the distance, what can we see? There are people fighting. Over there, a guy just got shot and killed. Over there, a truck just rammed an 18-year-old kid. Over there, the king's men are laying siege to a small city, ransacking and arresting people. And over here, there's two flags forming. And then I say, okay, the fighting's been getting worse. We've been standing up here watching it all just get worse and worse and worse. And so we look down and we go, hark, good sir, it appears the fighting is getting worse and may come this way. And Bill Burr, standing down at the ground, unable to see anything on the distance, just trees and buildings, goes, what are you talking about? There's nobody fighting anywhere. My neighbor right here. We're fine. And I'm like, yes, but up here we can see fighting everywhere. Everywhere. Escalating. Down there at the ground, they're like, we're drinking beer. What are you talking about? This guy over here says he's a liberal. We're fine. And I'm like, okay, maybe the fighting won't come here. Another way to put it is we're on top of a tower and we can see the clouds and the storm rolling in. And the guy down there says, I don't see any clouds. I don't see anything. I think you're crazy. And I say, it's all right there and it's getting bigger. The storm has been getting worse and bigger and it's slowly moving our way. But hey, it could turn and go the other direction. And you know what happens then? People like Bill Burr down on the ground go, see, and no storm ever came. You were wrong. Why should we listen to you? And I'm like, maybe the storm doesn't come. But I think it's so fascinating. You have stories like this from the LA Times. FBI agents drilled and pried their way into 1,400 safe deposit boxes. 18 months later, newly unsealed court documents show the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office in LA got their warrant for that raid by misleading the judge who approved it. Just one story. We know the FBI has been targeting Trump supporters. We know that they've gone after Trump himself. There may be criminal indictments against the former president, unprecedented. We know that they've lied, cheated, and stolen their way through the criminal investigation of Donald Trump with Russiagate, with Ukrainegate. They're going after Bannon, Peter Navarro. They're trying to stop Trump from being able to run. They've literally disqualified this guy. Was it Coy Griffin? Has been disqualified from holding office by a court under the 14th Amendment. Civil war territory, civil war amendments being used against sitting politicians. They tried to get rid of Marjorie Taylor Greene and failed. They are trying everything in their power to prevent duly elected people from being duly elected. What makes you think it's getting better? So maybe you can walk outside and nobody's fighting. But just think about how absurd that is. That you think in the Civil War, people in New York are running outside going, ooh, I'm so angry about those slave owners. I'm going to go punch a person who agrees with me. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't believe that civil war is predicated upon two disparate factions clashing towards the Mason-Dixon line, while also claim that neighbors should be fighting one another because that's what civil war is all about. It's not. It's never been. There's always regional political values. Look at the Spanish Civil War. In some pockets, it was communist. In some pockets, it was nationalist. And maybe there's sympathy in some of these areas, like I said. But they ain't going to come out and expose themselves, are they? So who do you fight? How many people in New York City, and we talk about it all the time, how many people in liberal cities are coming out and saying, I support Trump and think wokeness is bad? They're not speaking up. That's part of the problem. And they say because if they do, they'll get fired. They'll get ostracized. So what's happening? They're fleeing California. They're fleeing New York. And the numbers don't lie. They're rushing to Florida and Texas. So yes, you say, I go outside and nobody wants to fight. Yeah, because people are fleeing. Yeah, nobody wants to fight. No Trump supporter wants to go outside waving their Trump flag to get beat up. I mean, maybe there's some masochistic guy or guy who wants to fight. Fine. But for the most part, regular people are fleeing. So I guess we'll see. Who's right? Is it Bill Gates? Maybe it's Bill Gates, huh? You know, he's new to the party on saying civil war is coming, but fine. I would love to be wrong. I would love to have confirmation bias. I would love to read any story at any point suggesting that things are going to get better. I want them to get better. I imagine the luxury of just sitting on the beach and watching the waves and going surfing. Maybe we'll go this weekend. But the reality is every day I wake up and I see stories like this. And I say to myself, can't there be something else? Can't we just go back to watching football and just arguing over petty nonsense? No, we can't. Because a culture is forming. Culture is formed. Salon. They wrote about Only Ever Wanted, my song. Check out Only Ever Wanted on Spotify. Listen. And it was funny because they were like, the whole article's about me. But they use Ben Shapiro's picture and they say Tim Pool and Ben Shapiro, blah, blah, blah. And then the song just claims that Only Ever Wanted is political. It's completely apolitical. And then they took an obvious gag tweet from me and claimed it was real. Why? Because they want war. Not that they literally want to fight each other. But when, people say like, oh, there's no appetite for civil war, you need to understand this simple fact. Why did Salon take a tweet from me? I said, the success of Only Ever Wanted proves that people have a powerful hunger for emo music, but the corporatist globalist elite are preventing it from happening. No, I don't literally think that there's a cabal of globalists being like, no emo music. That was the joke. But they act like it's real. Why? They have to. Because their tribe dictates you must oppose and hate. Now, me, I don't think you have to. If someone, Mark Ruffalo does a good job as the Hulk, I'm down. That's fine. I think his politics are horrible. Chris Evans, I think, does great in the Marvel movies. Big fan. Think his politics are trash. I have no problem separating art from the artist. I think their politics are bad. But you take a look at these people and they're like, nope. Tim Pool's song that is completely apolitical in every way, which hit number 2 on iTunes and charted on hit number 2 on Billboard, which is better than iTunes. Number 2 on Billboard, meaning all different platforms. They're like, no, it's bad. People are only listening to it to own the libs. And I'm like, the song's not political in any way. Like, you don't listen to that song and be like, haha. And here's the other thing. Yeah, we did a lot of sales from people who are like, we want to promote culture that's not woke. But on Spotify, it's got like 140,000 hits in a month. And I'm not a major label artist with a big following in music. Will of the People's got 500,000. Both have millions of hits on YouTube. And leftists even said they liked my song Will of the People until they found out it was from me. That is a big reason why I think we are heading for a civil war. It's not about Twitter. It's about people in cities who are marching in lockstep with people who are outside of these cities. When someone says, I really like this music, and then Hassan Piker goes, it's Tim Pool, they go, oh, no, I don't like it. It's like, okay, if you have to hate something for no reason other than it's the opposing tribe, that's when you enter civil war. Which brings me to Joe Biden. When Biden comes out and says civil war, I'm sorry, not civil war. When he comes out and says half the country are extremists, I'm like, I think he's leading us towards that civil war. That's it. He says half the country are extremists. What next? I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.